Welcome to episode 25, The Bottom Line. In this series, this podcast series on the Intifada, we have chronologically covered the factual history of Hamas in the U.S. We discussed many organizations, names, and activities over a 30-year period. In this episode, I will try to explain just the highlights of what we've already covered. If you're watching this and have not seen the other episodes, for a detailed and factual explanation of this network, please start at episode 1 and watch the video version. It's very important. It contains a lot of evidence. Let's begin. In 1928, the International Muslim Brotherhood was created in Egypt by Hassan al-Banna. It is the largest modern-day Islamist movement in the world. Islamism is a political ideology, whereas Islam is a religion. They are not the same thing and should not be confused, although individuals and entities referenced it throughout this series want you to believe they are the same. In this episode, we discuss Islamism, not the religion of Islam. So the Muslim Brotherhood spread throughout the world after its creation. In the 1960s, it had its first presence in the United States, in student unions across various universities, in an entity called the Muslim Students Association. What you're seeing is a lecture from a prominent U.S. Muslim Brotherhood leader, Zayd al-Naman, when he talks about the history of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. You'll see he talks about how the Muslim Brotherhood began its recruitment of individuals to join its ranks, and that the main qualification or necessary step that they had to take was activism in the Muslim Students Association. Remember that the Arabic name for Muslim Brotherhood is Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, or in short, Ikhwan. By the 1980s, the Muslim Brotherhood was well established in the Gaza Strip and led by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. But it was also well established, the Muslim Brotherhood, in the United States and led by figures like Musa Abu Marzouk, whom we've discussed at length in this series, Mohammed Akram, also known as Mohammed Akram Adluni, Tariq Swaydan, and Zayd Noman, among others. Mohammed Akram Adluni, as a senior U.S. Muslim Brotherhood leader, wrote a memorandum about the Muslim Brotherhood's strategy in the United States in the early 90s, which involved sabotaging our democracy from within. Now, when the first Intifada broke out in Gaza in 1987, it was led by the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat. It was a secular group comprised of Yasser Arafat's group Fatah and several Marxist groups like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is also a designated terror organization, and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The International Muslim Brotherhood decided when the Intifada broke out, it must react or otherwise it would miss the boat on the Palestinian cause. So it authorized the creation of Hamas in the Gaza Strip to be its armed and striking wing against Israel. Its purpose was to obliterate Israel, a Western democracy. It was identified as one of the wings of the Muslim Brotherhood. And per its own charter, its goal, again, was to annihilate the country of Israel and refuse any compromise or peaceful negotiations. And so the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza became Hamas, as it was founded by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was the head of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, along with other senior Muslim Brotherhood leaders in Gaza at the time, like Ibrahim al-Yazuri and Mahmoud Zahar and Abdelaziz Rantisi and others. Hamas's first order of business, in addition to killing Israelis, was to undermine the popularity of the PLO and Yasser Arafat. The International Muslim Brotherhood almost immediately sent a delegation to the United States in early 1988 to meet with Musa Abu Marzouk and other senior U.S. Muslim Brotherhood leaders and tell them to use the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood's infrastructure to support Hamas with media, money, and political support, and to do this through front organizations. Marzouk then oversaw the creation and operation of the first 3 Hamas front organizations in the United States. The first was the Occupied Land Fund, which would soon be renamed the Holy Land Foundation. That was the fundraising arm. Then you had the propaganda arm, the Islamic Association for Palestine, and the political think tank, the United Association for Studies and Research. And here we see in this document where the Muslim Brotherhood is documenting exactly what it did. These are their words. They named these organizations in their own documentation that was seized from an archive at the home of one of these conspirators in 2004 by the FBI. Now, remember, the HLF's purpose was to raise money for Hamas. The IAP's purpose was to spread Hamas's propaganda to radicalize people for Hamas. And the UASR was to serve as the kind of political command in the Northern District of Virginia. And it's where Marzouk moved and began to operate Hamas's business, Hamas's worldwide business from. He would go on very quickly to become the very first Hamas political bureau leader, meaning he became, while living in the United States and overseeing these three front organizations, the number one decision maker in Hamas worldwide. We also talked about the fact that Marzouk didn't just create these front organizations, he helped create an investment business for himself with his cousins by marriage, the Alashis. That business was called Infocom, and it was located directly across the street from the Holy Land Foundation, where it serves Marzouk's personal purposes. The three front organizations were founded and are led by the following people and others. So the Holy Land Foundation, we had Shukri Abu Bakr, and we had Ghassan al-Lashe and Mohammed el-Massain. And then in the early days, the Islamic Association for Palestine really was Omar Ahmad at the helm. And then the United Association for Studies and Research was founded by Mohammed Akram Adluni and Ahmed Yusuf. Now, in 1992, Israel, and some suspect in collaboration with the PLO, secretly, deported the collaboration was secret, not the deportation, deported 412 senior Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad leaders to Marj al-Zahor, Lebanon, including people like Abdelaziz Rantisi, a Hamas founder. The U.S. apparatus did what it was supposed to do. The Holy Land Foundation raised funds and sent it to the deportees. The IAP published Hamas's propaganda about the deportation, and Marzouk operated Hamas's business from the Virginia-based UASR. And then in 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed, establishing peace between Israel and the Palestinians, establishing a path to a two-state solution, and establishing Palestinian self-rule under the Palestinian Authority led by Yasser Arafat. Hamas was furious because, why? They believed in no compromise on the issue of Israel. It must be obliterated, total annihilation through violence, and no other option. But also because Yasser Arafat and the PLO were getting credit for the positive developments in the region and the positive developments toward the Palestinians getting a state. Hamas vowed to derail the accords at any and all costs, including the sacrifice of the happiness and well-being of the Palestinian population. The U.S.-based leaders here got on the phone the day the Oslo Accords were signed, and that phone call was wiretapped, and they were planning a meeting in Philadelphia to discuss how to proceed in light of the accords. Included on the call were HLF leader Shukri Abu Bakr and IAP leader Omar Ahmad and a man named Abdel Halim Ashkar that we've talked about at length in this series. They ended up holding the meeting the first weekend in October in Philadelphia, 1993, and the FBI was there. They were not only there watching, they were there listening. They had surveillance photographs. They wiretapped the meeting. Attendees and speakers at the meeting included Omar Ahmad, again of the IAP at the time, Nahad Awad, who was also by this time a leader in the IAP, Shukri Abu Bakr of the HLF, Ghassan al-Lashe of the HLF and Infocom, Abdel Halim Ashkar, about whom we've talked about, Ismail el-Warase, an individual from whom the archives were seized, and others. There, they planned their strategy for the Palestinian territories in line with Hamas's goals. Derail the peace accord. Derail them. Support jihad. Promote the annihilation of Israel. Seize control over charitable organizations, schools, and hospitals. Why? To further radicalize the population in Gaza and by then the West Bank, and to undermine Yasser Arafat and, get this, defeat the Palestinian self-rule. In one part of the meeting, these individuals said, "God forbid the state started and things quieted down." And everyone in the room replied, "On wiretap, God forbid." You heard that correctly. They plan to sabotage a Palestinian government run by Palestinians and destroy the hope of a Palestinian state. Then these guys moved to their domestic strategy here in the U.S. First and foremost was their strategy was founded in survival of their infrastructure and lying to the American population about who and what they were. A quote by Shukri Abu Bakr of the HLF: "War is deception, deceive, camouflage." They planned in this meeting to infiltrate U.S.-based media outlets, universities, and politics. They planned to identify like-minded professors to place in key universities. They planned to cleanse curriculum in K through 12 schools. Because why? Listen to their words. "We don't want the children growing up surrendering to the issue of peace with Jews." Their words. This is a U.S.-based strategy. In the U.S., they didn't want their children growing up believing to surrendering to peace with Jews. Then they planned to create an organization in Washington, D.C. to do what? Defend their interests when they were scrutinized, to act as a cover for them. They noted they would need to intimidate others to adopt their narratives or remain neutral. Then, two senior IAP leaders who spoke at length at this conspiratorial meeting, Omar Ahmad and Nahad Awad, would go on some months later and officially found the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, in Washington, D.C., to serve as an ostensible civil rights organization, a theory and theme that was in line with one of the themes of the Philadelphia meeting, which was use words and terms and act under a cloak of something you are not to gain American support. This network vigorously pursued its goals, and Hamas aggressively used U.S. money funneled through the HLF to radicalize young children to hate Jews and believe violence was the answer to their problems. Hamas also vigorously pursued a horrendous suicide bombing campaign targeting civilians for years in Israel, hoping to use the aftermath to turn sentiment against Israel and also Palestinian Authority and Yasser Arafat. In 1995, Hamas and Musa Abu Marzouk were designated as specially designated terrorists for the murders that they were committing against an innocent civilian population in a Western democracy. Marzouk was deported from the United States in 1997 to Jordan, where he joined other Hamas leaders. By 2000, another intifada occurred, where Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the PFLP and other terror groups began committing unhinged acts of violence against the civilian population. And a war ensued between Israel and the terror organizations. Meanwhile, the U.S. network here of the front organizations operated seemingly undeterred until right before 9/11, when the FBI raided, not the HLF, Marzouk's investment business, Infocom, run by some of the same people that led in the HLF and the IAP, the Alashi brothers, cousins of Marzouk's wife, Nadia Alashi. And the FBI uncovered a trove of hidden HLF evidence there. CAIR claimed that this was an anti-Muslim raid to the public and the broader Muslim community, painting it as something that they knew it wasn't. They knew very well the ins and outs of the network because they were part of it. How do we know? We've listened to them talk. The war on terror began after 9/11, and the HLF was designated as a Hamas front and shut down. CAIR publicly condemned the action. The HLF appealed this designation through the highest courts, losing all appeals. A couple of weeks after the HLF was designated as a terror organization, the Muslim Legal Fund of America was formed in the Dallas area, where the HLF and Infocom had existed. Oh, and by the way, the IAP used to also exist in Richardson, which is a suburb of Dallas, until it moved to Chicago in the late 90s. The HLF's accountant was involved in the incorporation of the Muslim Legal Fund of America. Purpose was allegedly to protect Muslims from Islamophobia, but its first order of business was to stand up for the HLF. A civil lawsuit was filed in the meantime by the family of a Hamas victim, a teenager who was murdered by Hamas, and they obtained a judgment against the HLF, the IAP, the UASR, and others for the death of this Hamas victim. And at the time, the senior leaders within the IAP at the time of this judgment included Osama Abu Arshad, Rafiq Jabbar, and that was operating, but the HLF was defunct. And the UASR had shuttered its doors because its leader, Ahmed Yusuf, had gone abroad to Gaza to assist Hamas leaders in politics there. So the IEP was left standing facing a $150 million judgment, and they shuttered their doors. They avoided paying millions of dollars in damages. But not long after the IEP shut down, a man named Hatem Bazian founded the American Muslims for Palestine, 2 blocks away, approximately, from the IEP's old office, and staffed it with former IEP leaders with the same types of conferences being held, the same type of newspaper, just with another name, and the same type of propaganda. Interestingly, Bazian was reportedly the founder of the very first chapter of the Students for Justice in Palestine at UC Berkeley in the 1990s. Bazian is also currently the chairman of the Muslim Legal Fund of America. In the meantime, a Florida professor, Samuel Arian, and his co-conspirator, Hatem Fariz, were arrested for supporting the foreign terrorist organization Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Samuel Arian was a professor at the time. Sammy and Hatem ultimately pled guilty and served jail time, and then Sammy was deported. Hatem, however, went on to lead another ostensible charity organization that operates today and ostensibly sends aid to Gaza. Samuel Arian has been seen in online videos raising funds for the MLFA. In the mid-2000s, Hamas won a number of Palestinian elections and then entered a civil war with the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, killing brutally many Palestinian officials and Palestinian citizens in their violent bid for what? What did they want? Control of Gaza. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza. By 2007, Hamas was in full control of Gaza. In 2008, the HLF and 5 of its officers were convicted of providing material support to terrorism by a jury of 12, a verdict that the HLF and its attorneys vigorously appealed in a number of ways on a number of issues to the highest courts and lost. Let's pause here for a minute and reflect back on the statements from the federal court judge who presided over the HLF trial of the Holy Land Foundation and its defendants for their provision of support to Hamas. And his statements during sentencing of the defendants, where he discusses the significant amount of evidence that was used to prove that the HLF and the defendants were supporting Hamas. In fact, when federal court judge Jorge Solis participated in a sentencing hearing against Mohammed El-Mazain, the once chairman of the board of the Holy Land Foundation and a fundraiser for the Holy Land Foundation, he said to him, "What you claim is an offense that is outside the heartland of ordinary material support case, I disagree with that. I don't think the evidence shows that. I think the evidence shows, as I stated previously, that Mr. El-Mazain, you were involved at the very beginning with the creation of the Hamas-Palestine Committee here in the United States. And you were involved with the creation of the setting in motion the apparatus to support Hamas. The financial arm of that was Holy Land. You were a part of that from the very beginning. The evidence shows that you continued that even after it became illegal. I have already stated," and then Mr. Jonas has reiterated some of the evidence, the videos, the phone conversations that were played that indicated the violence against the Israelis, the Jews, killing Jews, and your support, your ardent and really not hidden support of Hamas. That is what you were about.
So your function, I think, in life was raising money to support Hamas. So when the groups that we've talked about in this podcast attempt to repackage the HLF and the HLF defendants as mere political prisoners, let's reflect back on what a federal court judge stated after hearing all of the evidence and all of the defense arguments to the contrary. They were about raising money for Hamas. They are not, as packaged by these groups, political prisoners.
It was in approximately the mid 2010s when we see the AMP and SJP, what we would call the Islamist groups, begin to partner with your leftist Marxist groups that aligned ideologically with the foreign terrorist organization, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, like Samadou. They aligned in their student activism and more general activism that promoted not just anti-Semitism, but anti-Western and anti-United States narratives. Samadou was recently designated itself as a front for the terror organization PFLP. During this mid-2010s, the boycott, divestment, sanction movement became a thing, as did false narratives about Israel committing genocide. The HLF defendants, who were convicts, were platformed, along with Samuel Arian, another person convicted of supporting terrorism, platformed as mere political prisoners, as opposed to what they were, which were individuals that faced trial and had their charges proved against them beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of 12 and appealed through the U.S. Court system. These false narratives, they wrap these false narratives in words to garner support from American citizens. CARE and the AMP and the MLFA and even the Muslim American Society formed a new umbrella organization called the USCMO to enhance their power. Globalize the Intifada was a propaganda platform that they began to use before the Hamas attacks on October 7th. In the years leading into the October 7th Hamas attacks, Hamas announced an official alliance in Gaza with the PFLP, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and DFLP in its operations against Israel. This appears to mirror the work by the groups in the United States, like the AMP, CARE, Samadou, MLFA, SJP, and other pro-PFLP groups. The Abraham Accords were put in place. What was that? Around 2020, to provide for peace and progress in the Middle East, including peace and progress between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. It promoted the normalization of relationship between Arab countries and Israel, and it was working. Progress, peace, hope for prosperity. But Hamas, again, vowed to derail progress at all costs. In the months leading up to October 7th, reports indicate Saudi Arabia and Israel were coming closer to an historic period of normalization, which would have been disastrous for Hamas and the other terror groups, frankly, yet productive for whom? The Palestinian population. So how does Hamas go about disrupting potential for peace and progress? Just as they did after Oslo, unhinged acts of violence followed by the pushing of false narratives to the West that make terror look legitimate. On October 7th, Hamas raped, burned, tortured, murdered, and kidnapped babies, toddlers, women, men, and the elderly when it invaded a sovereign country, Israel, a country it invaded from the Gaza Strip, which Hamas controlled. There was no occupation in Gaza on October 7th, 2023. And groups like SJP and AMP and Samadou and CARE repackaged this horror as legitimate self-defense, legitimate resistance, often bringing campus life at major universities to a halt, instilling fear in Jewish students and intimidating anyone not aligned with their terroristic narratives until they either adopted those, which many have, or remained silent. Where have we heard that before? It's an echo of the plan that CARE leaders set in place in the 1993 Philadelphia meeting. The scary thing is, what was unacceptable to utter to the American public in 1993, according to these same people, became normalized in the rhetoric of these groups. Hate has become acceptable, violence is seen as necessary, and instead of calling for the annihilation of one Western democracy, Israel, they are openly calling for dismantling of the greatest country in the world, our United States of America. Listen and look. Understand the false narratives that they are weaponizing to use to divide our society, to undermine our democracy, and dismantle our country. Thank you for joining me in this extremely important series on Intifada, Hamas in the U.S., then and now.
And we will take back these colleges, as we will take back America, as we will take back Palestine, as we will take back our humanity. You will be the path. We are the future. Assalamu alaikum.